The breaking of silence. The silence in Instructor Ark Tessiwaka's classroom hung like a physical presence, weighing down on the assembled students with all the force of her calculated intimidation. Her wings, spread wide in a deliberate display of authority, cast intricate shadows across the worried faces of her pupils. The morning light filtering through the crystalline windows of Vanguard Academy caught the iridescent feathers, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that only served to heighten the tension. Koala, the diminutive mammalian student, sat rigid in her seat, trying desperately not to draw attention to herself. But Instructor Ark had already fixed her piercing gaze upon the small creature, knowing full well how the intellectual prodigy struggled with physical demonstrations of power. It was a deliberate choice, a reminder that in the autocracy, mental prowess alone was insufficient. The other students, a diverse collection of the Empire's most promising youth, maintained their own uncomfortable stillness. There was Rias, the lanky reptilian CES, his scales shifting slightly with each carefully controlled breath. Ankh, the massive Chag, whose bone ridges seemed to pulse with anxiety beneath his thick hide. Even Vyson, another Superi Alice like the instructor herself, appeared to be wilting under the prolonged silence. Finally, Koala's resistance broke. A desperate gasp for air shattered the quiet, and the small mammal seemed to shrink even further into her seat as all eyes turned toward her. Instructor Ark allowed herself a slight smirk of satisfaction before speaking. Today, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority that had been cultivated through decades of service to the autocracy, we have an unprecedented opportunity. The tension in the room shifted, fear giving way to curiosity as the students exchanged uncertain glances. A former pupil of mine has made contact with rather interesting information, she continued, pacing before them with measured steps, her wings now folded regally behind her back. It seems that among our general populace, there has been an infiltrator. A human. The word sent a ripple of excitement through the classroom. Humans were creatures of legend to most of these students, known only through historical accounts and theoretical studies. The autocracy had limited contact with the species, viewing them as primitive yet surprisingly resilient beings who existed primarily beyond their borders. The human has been apprehended, Instructor Ark continued, and is currently being held at the Tress of Supreme Justice. We will be conducting a field observation. The announcement triggered a cascade of whispered conversations, quickly silenced by a sharp gesture from the instructor's disciplinary staff. The crystalline rod hummed with potential energy, a reminder of the consequences of speaking out of turn. This is not merely an excursion for your entertainment, she warned, her eyes narrowing. You will be expected to analyze, observe, and most importantly, understand. The autocracy's strength lies in its knowledge of both allies and potential threats. As she led her class through the gleaming corridors of Vanguard Academy, Instructor Ark began her impromptu examination. Rias described the physical form of a human. The CES straightened immediately, his voice cleared despite his nervousness. Bipedal mammals, Instructor. 2 eyes, 2 arms, 1 mouth, 1 nose, 2 ears. Average height 3/4 to a full claw, weight 6 to 8 branches. 5 digits per appendage, single-jointed legs with backward-bending knees. And their primary advantages, she pressed, leading them onto one of the Academy's exterior platforms. The platform began its descent from the mountain peak, offering a breathtaking view of Kawa Primus below. The city spread out beneath them in concentric rings of decreasing opulence, from the gleaming spires of the upper echelons to the more modest dwellings of the servant classes carved into the distant cliffs. The students hesitated to answer, each fear of being wrong outweighing their desire to demonstrate knowledge. The instructor's staff hummed ominously. Endurance, someone finally offered. Yes, Instructor Ark nodded, but that alone is not what makes them significant. Consider carefully, what trait do they share with the Superi Alice that has made them both feared and respected throughout known space? The platform continued its descent as the students pondered this question. They passed through layers of security fields, each shimming with a different hue of protective energy. Below, the city's morning activities were in full swing. Citizens of various species moved about their duties, CES technicians maintaining the city's complex systems, NASO engineers discussing blueprints beneath massive architectural drawings, and everywhere, the watchful presence of the Superi Alice administrators. Adaptability, ventured Vyson, only to receive a sharp crack from the disciplinary staff. You disappoint me, Instructor Ark sighed. Think beyond the physical. What truly separates the ruling species from the ruled? What quality allowed the Superi Alice to build this empire? The platform reached its destination, settling onto a landing pad adjacent to the Tress of Supreme Justice. The building rose before them like a physical manifestation of authority, its crystalline surfaces refracting the morning light into patterns that seemed to shift and move with living purpose. "Will," came a quiet voice from the back of the group. All heads turned to see Koala, standing straighter than usual despite her small stature. The will to dominate, to reshape reality according to their vision. Instructor Ark's expression remained neutral, but her wings rustled slightly, a sign of approval that her students had learned to recognize. Excellent, Koala. And this is why today's observation is so crucial. Humans possess this same quality, though they express it differently. Understanding this is vital to understanding why they must either be incorporated into the autocracy or eliminated entirely. As they approached the Tress's entrance, the students fell into perfect formation behind their instructor. The massive doors, etched with scenes of the autocracy's greatest victories, parted silently before them. You will observe the human carefully, Instructor Ark commanded. Note not just their physical characteristics, but their bearing, their responses, their adaptations to captivity. Remember, what you see today may well determine how you approach future interactions with their species. The interior of the Tress was a marvel of engineering and intimidation. Massive columns of living crystal pulsed with security measures, while gravity fields subtly adjusted to make visitors feel slightly off balance, a psychological reminder of the autocracy's power over even the fundamental forces of nature. As they descended into the detention levels, Instructor Ark continued her lesson. The human was discovered attempting to access restricted archives in the lower city. Rather than immediately apprehending them, our security forces observed their methods for several days. Can anyone tell me why this approach might have been taken? To identify possible collaborators, offered Rias. To study their infiltration techniques, suggested Enk. Both correct, but incomplete, Instructor Ark replied. The primary reason was to understand their motivation. The autocracy has learned through bitter experience that human actions, while often appearing chaotic or irrational, usually serve a larger purpose. Understanding this purpose is often more valuable than preventing any single act of defiance. They reached a heavy security door, flanked by 2 sentinel guards whose armor seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The instructor presented her credentials, and the door dissolved into particles of light. "Remember," she said as they prepared to enter, "you are here to learn. What you observe today will be tested, analyzed, and discussed in detail. Pay particular attention to the unexpected. As future leaders of the autocracy, your ability to recognize and understand anomalies will be crucial to your success." The cell beyond the door was not what the students expected. Instead of the stark containment field they had anticipated, they found themselves looking into what appeared to be a comfortable study. Books lined the walls, a desk held various papers and writing implements, and in the center, seated calmly in a reading chair, was the human. The first thing that struck the students was how ordinary the creature appeared. After years of studying fearsome historical accounts and theoretical texts, the reality seemed almost disappointing. Yet there was something in the human's posture, in the way they regarded their visitors with calm interest rather than fear, that suggested the legends might not be entirely exaggerated. "Good morning, Instructor Ark," the human said in perfect high speech, their voice carrying none of the subservient tones that protocol demanded. "I see you've brought students. How delightful. Shall we begin their education?" The slight smile that crossed Instructor Ark's face suggested that this was exactly what she had been waiting for. The education. The human's casual disregard for protocol sent a ripple of discomfort through the assembled students. Even Koala, usually so composed, shifted nervously at this breach of etiquette. But Instructor Ark merely inclined her head slightly, her feathers rustling in what might have been amusement. "Students," she announced, "meet Dr. Alexandra Chen, formerly of the Earth Historical Archives, currently our guest." The human's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. "Guest? Is that what we're calling it? I suppose the accommodations are rather nice for a prison cell." She gestured at the well-appointed room around her. "Though I do miss windows. The Tress of Supreme Justice provides appropriate accommodation for all its residents," Instructor Ark replied smoothly. "Particularly those of scholarly interest." Dr. Chen leaned forward in her chair, studying the students with an intensity that made several of them step back instinctively. "Scholarly interest. Yes, I suppose I am that. Though I wonder, Instructor, have you told your students why I'm really here?" The disciplinary staff hummed to life in Instructor Ark's grip, but the human showed no sign of concern. If anything, her smile widened slightly. "Class," the instructor said, her voice taking on the formal tone they associated with particularly important lessons, "observe carefully. What do you notice about our guest's behavior?" Rias, the CES student, was the first to respond. "She shows no deference to authority, Instructor. She maintains direct eye contact," added Vyson, his wings twitching slightly. "She appears comfortable," Koala said quietly. "As if she were hosting us rather than being detained." The human's laugh was unexpected, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the room. "Very observant, all of you. But you're missing the most important detail." She stood, causing the sentinel guards to tense, but made no aggressive moves. Instead, she walked to one of the bookshelves and pulled out a volume. "Can anyone tell me what these are?" The students exchanged confused looks. Ank, the Chag student, finally spoke up. "They appear to be standard historical texts, human. The kind used in basic education throughout the Autocracy." "Exactly." Dr. Chen's enthusiasm was palpable. "Standard historical texts. Written by the Autocracy, for the Autocracy. And I've read every single one of them." She returned to her chair, the book held casually in her lap. "Tell me, what do your texts say about the Battle of Proxima Centauri?" Instructor Ark's expression remained neutral, but her wings spread slightly, a warning sign her students had learned to recognize. The Battle of Proxima Centauri was a decisive victory for the Autocracy forces, demonstrating the superiority of our military doctrine and technology. "Ah," the human nodded, "and does it mention how many ships were lost?" "On both sides?" "The exact numbers are—" Instructor Ark began, but Dr. Chen cut her off. "The exact numbers are recorded in the Earth Historical Archives, which I studied extensively before coming here. Would you like to know what they show?" The tension in the room became almost unbearable. The students watched as their instructor's grip tightened on her staff, but before she could respond, Dr. Chen continued. "But that's not why I'm here, is it? I'm here because someone in your government finally realized that your historical records are incomplete. That there are gaps in your understanding of human nature that could prove problematic." Instructor Ark's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Students, what is the primary duty of an autocracy officer when confronted with potential disinformation?" To maintain absolute loyalty to established doctrine, they responded in unison, the words drilled into them through years of training. "And yet," Dr. Chen said softly, "here you are, bringing your students to speak with me. Why is that, Instructor?" For the first time, the students saw something like uncertainty cross their instructor's face. It lasted only a moment, but its impact was profound. "Because," Instructor Ark said carefully, "understanding one's potential adversaries is crucial to maintaining order." "Is that what I am? A potential adversary?" Dr. Chen opened the book in her lap, flipping through its pages with careful deliberation. Or am I something else entirely? Something that doesn't fit neatly into your categories of ally or enemy? Koala, surprising everyone including herself, stepped forward. You're a puzzle piece that doesn't fit the pattern. The human's eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. Exactly. And what do you do when you find a piece that doesn't fit? You discard it, Ankh said firmly, his bone ridges flexing with conviction. You examine it more closely, Koala countered, her voice stronger now. Because if it doesn't fit, either the piece is wrong. Or the pattern is, Dr. Chen finished. She turned her attention back to Instructor Ark. Your student shows remarkable insight. No wonder you brought them here. The instructor's wings rustled with what might have been pride, or perhaps concern. Koala has always shown an unfortunate tendency to question established patterns. Unfortunate? Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. Or exactly what you were hoping to cultivate? The silence that followed was different from the oppressive quiet of the classroom. This was a silence full of possibilities, of questions that had never before been asked aloud. Students, Instructor Ark finally said, you are observing a standard interrogation technique. The subject attempts to create doubt, to question established truths. Your task is to recognize and resist such manipulation. Is it manipulation if it's true? Dr. Chen asked mildly. She held up the book she'd been holding. This text speaks of the human tendency toward chaos, our inability to maintain social order without external control. Yet here I sit, calmly discussing philosophy with you. Rather orderly, wouldn't you say? The autocracy maintains order, Bison stated firmly, his wings puffing up in a display of pride. Does it? The human's voice was gentle, almost kind. Or does it maintain the appearance of order? Tell me, what happens to those who question the pattern? Who see pieces that don't fit? The students shifted uncomfortably, but it was Instructor Ark who answered. They are re-educated. Shown the error of their thinking. And if they persist? They are removed from positions of influence. And if they still persist? The silence that followed was answer enough. Yet here I am, Dr. Chen said, spreading her arms wide. In a comfortable room, filled with books, having philosophical discussions with students. Why do you think that is? The realization hit Koala first. Her large ears twitched as she worked through the implications. Because someone in the autocracy wants to understand. Really understand, not just confirm what they already believe. But that's. Ankh began, then stopped, his bone ridges rippling with confusion. Thinking exterior to the cube? Dr. Chen suggested, using the common phrase for heretical thoughts. Or perhaps thinking that encompasses the cube and everything beyond it. Instructor Ark's staff crackled with energy. Students, you are witnessing the dangerous charisma that makes humans particularly problematic. Observe how even simple questions can be used to undermine established truth. Truth? Dr. Chen smiled. Or doctrine. Because there's a fascinating difference between the two, isn't there? Truth doesn't need to be enforced. It simply is. Doctrine, on the other hand. She gestured at the disciplinary staff. The students watched as their instructor's expression shifted through several subtle changes before settling into something they had never seen before, curiosity. Perhaps, Instructor Ark said carefully, we should discuss the actual reason for your presence in our city. Ah, Dr. Chen's smile widened. Now we come to it. Yes, let's discuss why a human historian would risk everything to access your archives. Let's talk about what I found in those restricted sections before I was captured. But most importantly. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Let's discuss why certain members of your government are very, very interested in keeping that information from becoming public. The atmosphere in the room changed completely. Even the sentinel guards seemed to lean forward slightly, their attention caught by the human's words. Students, Instructor Ark announced, her voice carrying an unfamiliar edge of uncertainty, today's lesson has taken an unexpected turn. We are about to witness something rare in the Autocracy, the beginning of a genuine dialogue. What followed would change not only the students' understanding of their society but the very foundation of the Autocracy itself. The revelation. Dr. Marcus Blackwood sat with the kind of stillness that made even the Sentinel guards uneasy. His dark eyes, set in a weathered face that spoke of years spent in various archives across human space, held a depth of knowledge that seemed to challenge the very foundations of the room around him. Gone was Dr. Chen's gentle prodding, in its place was something far more direct. Your archives, he began, his deep voice resonating with authority, contain a fascinating oversight. One that I believe your superiors are now scrambling to understand. He turned to Instructor Ark, his expression grave. You see, I'm not just a historian. I'm a xenoarchaeologist specializing in pre-autocracy civilizations. The change in the room was immediate. Even Instructor Ark's wings twitched involuntarily at the mention of pre-autocracy studies, a field notoriously restricted within their society. Students, she said quickly, observe how the subject attempts to dash. To what? Blackwood interrupted, standing with fluid grace that belied his apparent age. To speak about the ruins your people so carefully avoid. The ones that don't fit your narrative of superior evolution. Koala's ears perked forward with interest, while Rias's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of intense concentration among the CES. Vyson, however, stepped forward aggressively. The Superialis achieved dominance through natural superiority, he declared, wings spreading in the traditional display of authority. Blackwood's laugh was nothing like Dr. Chen's warm amusement. This was a sharp, challenging sound. Did they? Then perhaps you can explain the markings I found in the lower city archives. The ones that show a very different story about the origins of your natural abilities. Instructor Ark's disciplinary staff hummed to life, but Blackwood didn't even glance at it. Instead, he walked to the far wall and pressed his hand against what appeared to be a solid surface. To everyone's shock, a hidden panel slid open. You knew, he said to Instructor Ark, or at least, you suspected. Why else bring your most questioning students to meet me? The instructor's expression remained neutral, but her grip on the staff loosened slightly. Students, what is the first principle of scientific investigation within the Autocracy? To verify all findings against established doctrine, they recited automatically. And when findings contradict doctrine? Blackwood pressed, pulling a small device from the hidden compartment. They are revised until Ink began, but Koala cut him off. Until they fit the pattern, she said, her voice trembling with sudden understanding. But what if the pattern itself is artificial? Blackwood held up the device, a small holographic projector that shouldn't have existed in a prisoner's cell. Exactly. Watch carefully, young ones. What you're about to see isn't just hidden history, it's the truth about why humans are considered so dangerous to your society. Story continues with revelations about genetic engineering, ancient civilizations, and the true origins of the Superialis. Would you like me to continue with the rest of Part 3? The story is building toward a major revelation about the Autocracy's foundations and the true relationship between humans and the Superialis. I can also adjust Dr. Blackwood's character or add different elements if you'd like. The hidden pattern. Dr. Raven Solis carried herself with the precise movements of someone who had spent decades piecing together ancient puzzles. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back severely from a face that spoke of indigenous South American ancestry, and her dark eyes seemed to hold centuries of untold stories. Pattern recognition, she said, pacing the length of her well-appointed cell with measured steps, is the foundation of all scientific inquiry. But there's a trap in it, isn't there? She stopped before the assembled students. We see what we expect to see, and we dismiss what doesn't fit our expectations. The students watched as she moved to one of the many bookshelves lining the walls, her fingers trailing along the spines with deliberate purpose. Your civilization, she continued, has built itself on a pattern of natural superiority. The Superialis at the top, followed by a carefully constructed hierarchy of species, each in their proper place. Instructor Ark's wings rustled slightly, the only indication of her unease. "Students, observe how how I'm about to shatter everything you believe." Dr. Solis interrupted, pulling a particular book from the shelf. "No, instructor. Observe how I'm about to show them what you already suspect." The tension in the room shifted as she opened the book, revealing it to be hollow. Inside lay a small crystal matrix, technology that shouldn't have existed in a prisoner's cell. "This," she said, holding up the crystal, "contains data from your own archives. Data that your superiors tried very hard to bury. Would you like to know why?" Kuala stepped forward, her natural curiosity overcoming her training. "What kind of data?" Dr. Solis smiled. "Genetic data. Specifically, genetic manipulation signatures that predate the rise of the autocracy by several thousand years." The revelation sent a ripple through the assembled students. Vison's wings flared in automatic denial, while Rias's scales shifted through patterns of confusion. "Impossible," Enk declared, his bone ridges flexing. "The Superi Alice achieved their form through natural evolution. Did they?" Dr. Solis activated the crystal, and holographic data streams filled the air around them. "Then explain these markers. These very specific changes to what was once a far more mundane avian species. Changes that bear a remarkable similarity to human genetic engineering techniques." Instructor Ark moved forward, her disciplinary staff crackling with energy. "This is forbidden knowledge. Is it?" Dr. Solis's voice carried a sharp edge of challenge. "Or is it simply knowledge that doesn't fit your pattern? Look at the data, instructor. You know what it means. It's why you brought these particular students here today." The holographic display shifted, showing a series of genetic sequences that even the students could see were eerily similar. "The Superi Alice didn't evolve naturally into their current form," Dr. Solis continued. "They were uplifted. Enhanced. Given the very abilities that now form the basis of their claim to natural superiority." "By whom?" Kuala asked, her voice barely a whisper. "By a civilization that preceded both of ours," Dr. Solis replied. "A civilization that left traces across a dozen worlds, including Earth and your own Kawa Primus. A civilization that understood genetic engineering at a level we're only beginning to comprehend." She manipulated the crystal, and the display changed to show archaeological sites, some familiar to the students, others clearly off-limits. "These ruins you so carefully ignore. They're not just remnants of a fallen empire. They're laboratories. Research facilities. Places where a species far more advanced than either of ours once worked to create something new." "And the humans?" Vison demanded. "Where do they fit in this pattern?" Dr. Solis's smile held no warmth. "That's the question that terrifies your leadership, isn't it? Because humans weren't uplifted. We evolved naturally to a point where we could understand and potentially replicate what was done to create the Superi Alice. And that makes us a threat," Kuala finished. "Because if what you're saying is true, then the entire basis of autocracy authority is built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies," Dr. Solis concluded. "And worse, the technology used to create that authority still exists. Hidden in those ruins you've been taught to ignore." The story continues with Part 4, introducing yet another key character and building on these revelations. Would you like me to proceed with Part 4, continuing to build on these revelations while introducing new complexities to the story? The Breaking Storm. Captain Sarah Winters held Commander Tessa Waka's helmet with the reverence of someone handling evidence that could shatter an empire. Her cybernetic eye pulsed with a soft blue light as she activated its scanning features, projecting the helmet's damage patterns into the air between her and the students. "Look closely," she said, her voice carrying the weight of buried truths. "These aren't plasma burns or impact marks. They're chemical scarring from laboratory containment fields. The kind used in genetic research facilities. Instructor Ark's wings trembled slightly, the first real sign of emotion she'd shown since entering the cell. That helmet is classified military property dash. Property? Winters interrupted, her organic eye flashing with anger. This isn't property, instructor. This is evidence. Evidence your ancestor tried to preserve before they silenced her. The students watched in stunned silence as holographic readouts filled the air, showing detailed analysis of the helmet's damage patterns. Koala's ears twitched as she processed the implications, while Rias's scales shifted through patterns of deep thought. Commander Waka didn't die defending autocracy values, Winters continued, her voice growing harder. She died trying to expose what she found in the deep archives. The truth about the liberation wars, about first contact, about everything your society is built upon. She placed the helmet carefully on her desk and pulled up additional holographic displays. Tell me, students, what do you know about the Battle of Proxima Centauri? It was our greatest victory, Bison said automatically, his wings puffing with inherited pride. The Superi Alice proved their superior dash. Superior what? Winters cut him off. Superior genetics. The ones that were engineered by the very species you were fighting. She manipulated the holographic display, showing ancient battle footage that none of the students had ever seen. The images showed Superi Alice warriors, but not in the glorious victory poses they were used to seeing. Instead, they showed confusion, chaos, and something else, genetic transformation happening in real time. The liberation wars weren't about freedom or sovereignty, Winters explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They were about control. Control of the genetic keys that could unlock the next stage of evolution for all species. Ank's bone ridges rippled with disbelief. But our histories dash. Your histories were written by the winners, Winters said. But not the winners you think. She pulled up another display, this one showing a familiar symbol, the mark of the autocracy itself. But as they watched, the symbol began to change, revealing older versions of itself, evolving backward through time until. That's impossible, Instructor Ark breathed, her disciplinary staff falling silent in her grip. The symbol had transformed into something that looked undeniably human in origin. The autocracy wasn't founded by the Superi Alice, Winters revealed. It was created by humans. Specifically, by a faction of human genetic researchers who discovered the ancient uplift technology and decided to experiment. The silence in the room was absolute as the implications sank in. Koala was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. The Superi Alice were test subjects, Winters finished grimly. The most successful test subjects in history. Given wings, enhanced intelligence, extended lifespans, everything needed to create the perfect ruling class. A class that would then be convinced they had achieved these traits naturally, through superior evolution. She turned to Instructor Ark, whose wings were now fully spread in what might have been threat or protection. Your ancestor discovered this truth. Found the original research files, the genetic markers, everything. And when she tried to reveal it, they killed her, Instructor Ark said softly. My family's rise to power was your reward for staying silent, Winters confirmed. But Commander Waka wasn't completely silenced. She left breadcrumbs for those who knew where to look. Clues that would eventually lead someone to the truth. The captain's cybernetic eye flashed as she activated another hidden compartment, this one revealing something that made even the Sentinel guards step forward in alarm, a genetic sequencer of clearly ancient design. This, Winters said, lifting the device carefully, is what your ancestor died protecting. It's not just a piece of equipment, it's the key to undoing everything the original human researchers built. The key to true genetic freedom for all species. She looked at each student in turn, her gaze lingering on Koala. Your society tells you that questioning authority is dangerous. That thinking exterior to the cube leads to chaos. But what they really fear isn't chaos, it's choice. The choice to determine your own evolution, your own future. Instructor Ark's voice, when it came, carried an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. If what you're saying is true, why reveal it to students? Why not take this directly to the council? Winters smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because the council already knows. They've always known. Who do you think maintains the genetic suppression protocols that keep the Superi Alice from evolving further? Who controls the natural development of every species in the Autocracy? She held up the sequencer, its ancient surfaces gleaming. This device doesn't just prove the truth, it can undo the locks they put in place. Allow every species to reach their full potential, not just the chosen few. The implications were staggering. If what Winters was saying was true, then everything these students had been taught about their society, about their very nature, was a carefully constructed lie. So now you have a choice, Winters said, her voice growing gentle. You can walk out of here, report everything you've seen, and maintain the comfortable lies you've been taught. Or we can help you expose the truth, Koala finished, her small form straightening with determination. The captain's organic eye sparkled with approval. There's more, she said. Much more. But first, you need to understand exactly what happened during those first experiments. Why some humans chose to create the Autocracy, and why others have spent centuries trying to undo their work. She turned to Instructor Ark, whose wings were now folded close to her body in a pose of deep thought. Your ancestor made her choice, Instructor. Now it's your turn. Will you honor her sacrifice, or maintain the lie that killed her? The answer to that question would determine not just their fate, but the future of every species in the Autocracy.